So thank you. Thank you for that, David. Why now? I believe that we are standing in a unique moment in human history. I think that the quantum of change, the pace of change that we've been experiencing is only a taste of what we're going to experience going forward. I believe that we don't have 8 years. Most climate scientists, we've got 8 years to kind of get this right. I believe that we are actually behind in terms of the time frame that we need to be operating in terms of investing in making communities more resilient. So at its core, the Green Jobs Machine is a platform that's all about resilience. We're going to talk more about the why, the what, the who, the when, the where, but the time for us to act is already behind us. So I believe that if we don't start prioritizing investing in making communities more resilient, that climate mitigation is going to fail, because we're going to always be looking at remediation. We're always going to be looking at cleaning up or trying to respond to adverse climate conditions. And so the time for us to be investing in resilience, which we define as the ability to prepare for, to respond to adapt to, and to thrive in adverse climate conditions is now. As a matter of fact, it was yesterday, but it certainly is now. And so that's why I believe that this moment right now is imperative.
So you set the scene that it's imperative now. And what I love about this is a focus specifically on green jobs. So maybe if we could dive a little bit more, why the focus on green jobs? If you could share sort of your narration as to the linkages between people making the conversion from whatever job they're currently doing to becoming more green with that job, and how that will lead to both regional and local prosperity, but also stability and sustainable transformation. So why green jobs specifically?
Okay. And so I want to answer that question within the context of frontline communities, because this platform, this climate tech, resilient tech business, which is the Green Jobs Machine, can be targeted at any community, right? And so why frontline communities and why green jobs in frontline communities? So we're very much about the transition to green, right? And we're very much about the just transition to green. And so we're targeting frontline communities for green jobs creation, because if you think of this as a war, right? Fighting for survival, you've got to hold the front, right? And so we are as weak as the most vulnerable communities amongst us. So when those communities fail, the chain of action fails. So if frontline communities fail, it has dire consequences for all of us. So I want you to think about frontline communities as those communities that bear the first and the worst of adverse climate change or climate change. And so when we target frontline communities, we're being very strategic in ascertaining how do we actually support climate mitigation in those places where people are in close proximity to some of the biggest challenges that we're facing. That's why we call them frontline communities. So if not now, when? And if not them, then who? Right?
So I, of course, love your vision, love the team you've assembled. If I could dive a little bit further. So you're actually talking, when you say about those frontline communities, you're talking about, Gulfport, Mississippi, small towns in West Virginia, but you're also talking about possibly, townships in Cape Town. Exactly. So let's dive a little bit into that, because you've had experience working with those groups. And so maybe first I could ask about the experiences you've had leading entrepreneurship around the world, empowering women entrepreneurs.
Why? The why is, if we don't do this, we're going to die. How's that for it in a nutshell? And trying to figure out how to do this and scale it globally is what we're about. It's not enough to just to go to Luling, Texas, where we're going to have and make some amazing people talk about the work we're going to be doing. It's not enough to get it right in Cape Town, where we're going to have one of our bright young things talk about the work that she's doing in Cape Town. It's not enough to go and work with the Rosebud Sioux in South Dakota and across those 10 states. It's not enough to impact 1 million people. We've got to impact billions of people, and we've got to do it now, right? And so I want to bring you back to the why. The what? The Green Jobs Machine is a platform. We've got on our team, and I'm answering the question of who, and I'll talk a little bit about myself, but on our team, we've got experts who have deep experience in how to build community. Because you got to start out understanding what the needs are of the community before you can help that community to develop a strategy for being resilient, right? You don't just roll into town. You got to go in and be humble and ask questions and understand the needs of the community. And that's part of what's wrong and what's broken in terms of how we deploy capital, the little capital that finds its way into these communities, right? And so it's not a top-down approach. It's very much a bottom-up approach. And so the who. On our team, we've got people who have deep expertise in how to build community. We've got deep expertise in how to incubate businesses that create green jobs. We know that small and medium enterprises are the backbone of any economy, not just here in the United States, but globally. That's where the job creation comes from. It's when small businesses grow to be medium businesses, and those businesses grow to be large businesses. That's where the job creation comes in. Okay, so we've got deep experience in how to do that from scratch. We've done it successfully in some of the most hardest to penetrate regions on earth. We know how to accelerate those businesses so that they're not stuck just being small. We know how to scale them and cut across the fragmentation that results in silos. So if you look at the regulatory environment here in the United States, for example, there's great incentive for small businesses to stay small. Because if they start becoming medium, then they don't get the support that they think they need. And so the job creation never happens. So we got to cut across that. And then we know how to fund stuff. Right? We've successfully deployed capital in hard to penetrate places, and we've demonstrated that we know how to build businesses. We know how to go into communities, and we know how to interact with people, understand what the needs are, meet those needs, and then still find the green unicorns that are game changers. We know how to do that. That's our team. So if you Google us, you go to the GJM, stands for greenjobsmachine.com, you're going to see the incredible team. And if you're on the platform, you will see the folks with the green background. I'm going to introduce all of them. We've got funders, we've got technologists, we've got scientists, we've got climate activists, we've got students, we've got everything that you need to make this a success. My background, I grew up, I am a former banker, lawyer, Wall Street. I'm a reformed Wall Street type, okay? And I went to South Africa about 24 years ago to actually serve as a volunteer researcher for the Constitutional Drafting Committee. I ended up clerking for Justice Albie Sachs, who's one of the first Constitutional Court justices. And I never went back to Wall Street because I had enough sense to know that my activities in mortgage-backed securitizations was not sustainable. So I did not take the global financial market on my own, but I certainly had a part in it. And so I stayed. And over the last 20 years, I've had the good pleasure of working with some of the most incredible people across about 14 markets in sub-Saharan Africa. I've been active in smart city development projects in Asia. I then helped Singularity University, of which you are a member of the faculty, to come to South Africa. And then during the pandemic, I came back to be with family. Oh, by the way, I've helped to set up one of the world's largest and most impactful women's infrastructure investment groups. And I teach project finance at the University of Cape Town at the business school. And then I landed back here. I'm from this part of the world, and I got involved with policy advisory work at the intersection of climate and infrastructure. And that is where I got this idea to launch the Green Jobs Machine, first here in the United States, and then we'll look at what we can do in the rest of the world.
So very impressive. And we've set the scene now. Now we have some virtual guests that are also going to be joining us. And so would like to go to them first and sort of have them each introduce themselves. I believe, just want to confirm, Bill, are you online? And Suzanne, are you both online?
Yes, I'm here.
And
All
yes,
right.
I'm here as well. Yes.
So maybe real quick, Suzanne, if you could give a little bit of scene setting about a little bit both about who you are and then your thoughts as to why now is so important that we launch the Green Jobs Machine. And then we'll go to Bill and do the same thing. But Suzanne, if you could go first, that would be great.
Okay, great. First of all, it's just a pleasure to be here with all of you from dialing in from London. Suzanne Beagle, I'm the co-founder of Gender Smart, which is a global community of almost 4,000 people and institutions committed to unlocking what we call gender smart capital at scale. So what that means is that we think about where women are in the picture at leadership and governance, entrepreneurship and ownership, where they are in employment and where those good green jobs might be female, thinking about supply chains, thinking about products and services, both B2B and B2C, that are really relevant and for women as customers in particular, and really thinking about communities. So when we talk about the nexus of climate and gender, this is a big thing we've been working on and I've been working on for many, many years, and really bringing together, we can't talk about solving for the climate crisis without, as Sharon says, thinking about where frontline communities are. And we can't think about where frontline communities are without thinking about where the women are. And we need people from every part of the population to be leaning in as entrepreneurs, as workers, as consumers, as policymakers, as investors to understand and create the solutions that we need, manage the risk of not paying attention, and really build that resilience. And so why now? It's 2022. We have a climate crisis, we have a COVID crisis, we have an economic crisis, a crisis in every direction we look at. We also have a crisis around inequality. And so I'm here to talk about why and why now. Bringing climate and gender, climate resilience and gender together is an absolute imperative, both from a risk mitigation standpoint and thinking about what do we miss when we don't have women at the table in terms of their innovation, their community building, their ability to really listen and create solutions that are relevant, their collaboration, and their expertise to really be in those good green jobs, and to invest and to really invest in a way that's fit for purpose for the kinds of businesses we might be talking about at every different part of the scale, every scale, from the startup phase all the way through to the growth stage. So we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about the opportunity that we get when you have those women as designers, as product designers, as innovators, as solution generators, as the people in sales and marketing and customer service and all the other things that make a business go. And then we need to be thinking about the opportunity for value creation, both for those business owners, but also for the investors and for the community at large. And so, and for the bigger businesses that might do business with those businesses. So every reason in the world to be thinking right now about this imperative as we are looking to solve for resilience, we need to be thinking absolutely of not recreating the patterns that we've had in the past, but thinking fresh, from a fresh perspective and benefiting from all of the talent that's there. So I'll talk more about that, but that's my context setting.
Excellent, Suzanne, and really loved your remarks. You're getting a round of applause here, especially about the need to think fresh, not to repeat the old patterns, to address the fact that we need to lean in and address the inequality as we do this. And I loved also what you said, fit for purpose. With so often we see investments that are not fit for purpose as well. So with that high bar set, Bill, it's now over to you to share a little bit about both. Can you share a little bit about your background and why you think now is so important for the Green Jobs Machine to launch?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much. So in terms of my background, I've actually had sort of 3 different careers that all seem to come together to sort of give a little bit of a background as to how government and the private sector can try to solve big problems. The first part of my career was in the government, where I had a number of different roles, mostly on national security and working in the White House and looking at science and technology policy, and eventually as director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The next part of my career was in the private sector, where I actually ran both for-profit and not-for-profit research institutions, looking at cutting edge research. And just recently, I've started now a venture capital fund on really looking at how do you accelerate deep technology from the laboratories into creating value for both national security and economic security. And so with that, I'm really focused on the role of government and private investors in creating new markets. And specifically for markets where the full economic returns don't accrue to the investors. And so to set the stage, I actually have a quote from former President George W. Bush that I think is actually pretty appropriate. And he said, the role of government is not to create wealth. The role of our government is to create an environment in which the entrepreneur can flourish, in which minds can expand, and in which technologies can reach new frontiers. And that quote is sort of a simple description of what's required to create new markets like clean tech or resilient communities, and where the interface lies between government and entrepreneur. So except for a few areas like national defense, creating a sustainable market ultimately requires investment from the private sector with the expectation that they'll make a reasonable financial return. The role of the government then is to reduce the technical risks through funding of basic and applied research, facilitating standards to foster commercial engagement, and to set clear regulations, and occasionally be an anchor tenant in that business. So I can give you like one example of where I think this has worked well, and then I can give a bit of an example as to why clean tech has been difficult in the past and what may have changed. So a current example where this is working, although only recently, is actually the rise of commercial space economy. So for decades, the government viewed space as an extension of national security and really tightly controlled the technology. Government control was motivated by the desire to maintain US dominance, but it actually slowed innovation and allowed other countries to close the capabilities gap. So about a decade ago, a shift occurred as the government embraced commercial space. Decades of government technology development reduced the cost, commercial friendly regulations arose, and standards were established. And now we have routine and inexpensive access. These new businesses that are being created are funded by the private sector, by private capital, and are a global phenomenon, and sometimes the government buys services. The amount of money that is now pouring in to space, private space, is about equal to the budget of NASA and dwarfs the ESA budget, which is really now allowing us to expand the economic sphere of influence. Now, I think there's actually a direct analogy to what can be done to reduce climate change and to improve community resilience. So governments around the world invest in the basic and applied research, and a lot of progress has been made on that front. But where they're lagging is the development of regulations and the setting of standards. And without these clear guardrails, uncertainty is increased, and therefore investors shy away from investing because financial returns need to be larger when there's uncertainty. And in the absence of this government setting of standards, what we're seeing is the private sector, large investors and consumers are now starting to demand change, and they're starting to fill the void that the government usually fills. You're seeing this in terms of dialogue within boardrooms where ESG is now a topic. And this is unprecedented and represents a major shift in the role of companies from just creating shareholder value to now also including the responsibility to improve the communities and the welfare of their employees. So these private sector initiatives are now welcome, but I would argue are still insufficient, right? There's a limit to what the private sector can accomplish without government coordination. And similarly, there's a limit to what government can do without a sustainable support from the private sector. Now, there's a lesson to be learned actually from around the early 2000s, where actually clean tech was sort of the darling of Silicon Valley at that time. And during the 2000s, the financial returns from clean tech investments was actually really poor. And in an analysis by MIT, internal rates of return were consistently negative, with VCs losing half the money they invested. And at the time, MIT claimed that the correct lesson is that clean tech does not fit the risk return time profiles of traditional venture capital investors. Now, in hindsight, I think it's pretty clear to show that that conclusion is incomplete, that rather we need to think about things like clean tech, community resilience in two broad categories. Those companies that can be started, that can appropriate the majority of the social good into the financial returns, and those that generate a huge amount of social good, but don't appropriate those financial returns directly. And there are examples, for instance, Tesla, where large financial returns are generated by a company that started out extremely technically risky, was extremely capital intensive, but also required government stimulus to succeed. And in Tesla's case, gasoline engines were cheaper and proven reliable. So the market demand had to be shifted, and the government shifted market demand by creating large rebates for electric vehicles. This created the social good, and the policy worked to stimulate electrical vehicle adoption. But there's still a need to explore the full range of options the government has to incentivize green private sector investment in other areas. And so where that social good is not being turned into direct economic good, we need creativity right now more than ever. We know that the public sector is willing to step in. We've seen that with the pressure they're putting on large corporations, but we have a paucity of really good policy ideas. And so we need ways of creating sustainable investments. And that's why the green jobs machine is so important. And that's why now, because by bringing together the public sector, the private investment, and local community need leaders is the approach that's necessary to create an informed and sustainable initiatives. These have to be driven by data and objective analysis to really create that deeper understanding of the needs and the incentives. So I'm really optimistic that by coupling data analysis and innovative policy, a sustainable approach can occur to building resilient communities. And I really want to applaud you and the Green Jobs Machine for the vision on taking this on. And I'm so happy to be at least a small part of this.
Well said as well, Bill. You rose to the occasion. Thank you for that. So I'm going to now circle back to Sharon, and then we'll go to Suzanne. And sort of, as you heard from both Suzanne about that there's an imperative to think about how we make sure this includes everyone, and we lean forward. And Bill was talking about how it's actually going to be about how we bring together both industry and government partners, because it can't be done alone.
Right.
Where do you begin?
Where do you begin? Well, I think you begin with the end in mind. One of my favorite authors is Stephen Covey, and he talks about beginning with the end in mind. And so I want to pick up with Bill, and then I want to circle back to my good friend and colleague and woman at arms, Suzanne Beagle. And so, Bill, I mean, you really had a drop the mic moment. You've said so many things that I think we could really spend this afternoon just talking about what Suzanne and Bill have said, right? So the work that we have been doing over the past year at the Green Jobs Machine, digging into resilience, what it means, why it matters, and then how do we catalyze more investment in resilience across the world, really began, Bill, you'd be happy to know, supported by NIST, and it was actually the National Research Council. So the seminal work around what is resilience, and sign up and we're going to send you some information, and part of the appendix of the deck we'll send you has a lot of the research sources, and you will clearly see us citing work that was done by the National Research Council. So back in 2012, they really scoured the earth and said, okay, we need to get our minds around resilience. It's a key tenet of our national security strategy with respect to climate, but we don't actually really understand what it is. What is it, how it works, and how do we begin to have some common understanding so that we can promulgate policies that help us to implement strategies that result in change, right? And so you go back and you look at what happened in 2012 to today, it's still fragmented. It's like we invested. You look at what happened in the Gulf region. We gave entities in the Gulf region, we as in taxpayers, $500 million to go and figure this out. Where is that today? So it absolutely has to happen now. Tremendous resources, but what's different? Okay, so one of the things that's different today is, listen, we've been at this a long time. Like I said, we're not lighties. You know, we know what we're doing in this space. But as Bill has said, you can't do it alone. This is a collective, but this is absolutely Operation Warp Speed. This is Operation Warp Speed. You hear me, so? With respect to climate. If you go back to the example of COVID, without private sector investment, where are those vaccines going to come from, right? It's Moderna and Pfizer, but with government support, right? So I think what Bill has said is spot on. We need NIST in here. We need DARPA in here. We need the National Research Council in here. We need policies that make sense at the federal, at the state, at the local level, and we need private sector. And so we're bringing our part. We just need the rest of the collective to step up and do what they need to do.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Sharon. And Suzanne, I'm going to go to you because you sort of, when your remarks, you indicated you had some additional specifics that you wanted to share. And so maybe if you could share us some of the specifics about what we should be thinking about as we start on this journey, if there's examples that are either already working or ideas that you want to move forward. So Suzanne, over to you to share your thoughts on how we should learn from what's out there and carry it forward as we move forward with the Green Jobs Machine.
Well, thank you. So I think one of the things that we've got going for us, and Sharon said, we're not new to this. We're people with a lot of experience, is that this whole arena of investing consciously with a gender and diversity lens has been growing over the last 20 years. So we have a group of development finance institutions who are essentially the investment banks of governments, for those of you that are not in that world. And they collectively in 2018 committed $3 billion as a start to say, we're going to invest with the gender lens intentionally in climate, in infrastructure, in private equity, in financial institutions that on lend to women entrepreneurs, for example, and green entrepreneurs. We have corporates, foundations, family offices, investors of every stripe, including the big banks, who have said this is a priority. And that gender and diversity, equity, and inclusion is a priority, while we're also thinking about climate as a priority and other areas as priority. So that's not new, but it's been really growing. So we're in a trend. Now, where did some of that come from? Coming back to governments who have not only a climate agenda, but a feminist foreign policy agenda or a gender agenda to say it's 2022, it's time to really think about all of our citizens. So where the government can play, there's so many places for public policy here. We've seen examples where people will say, not only do our development impact projects need to carry the development of jobs, but they need to be good jobs. And who are those jobs good jobs for? They need to be for men and for women. We need to be starting younger, and we need to be thinking about where that education and training system, and what are the pathways from education into work. We need to be sure that we have capital that can be allocated in different flavors. So grant capital, loan guarantees, first losses, all the different flavors of capital, including commercial capital, but to unlock more private sector capital. And I really appreciated Janet Yellen speaking recently, Samantha Power speaking recently about how if we don't do a better job of unlocking private sector capital by using government capital appropriately, then we are absolutely not going to hit our goals. So we have that leadership that's there to guide us. We've got the ability in a local community for someone like New York City said, we're going to have a fund that is going to invest alongside private investors in women-led venture capital firms, in women-led companies. and companies especially started by communities of color. And so you've got examples all over the world where that's happening from a policy side. And then on the private side, commitments that are being made by UBS and Morgan Stanley and Bank of America and you name it, every bank is now realizing that this has got to be part of their strategy. So when we think about where to start, we need to think all the way to the end, but we want to think to the beginning of what do we understand about resilience, coming back to where are we on the green jobs machine? What are those things around agriculture, around energy, around transportation, around the built environment, the specifics around infrastructure, all the pieces and the parts, communications infrastructure, and then say, where are those business ideas that are the great business ideas that can come from those local communities or be replicated to scale? And so we have lots of good examples where we can say a brilliant idea in Texas may actually work in some other part of the world. And vice versa. And a brilliant idea in South Africa may be actually perfect in New York City. And so one of the companies I've invested in is a women-led, women-founded company called Apolitical, which looks at the role that public sector innovators can play, especially around climate as an example, and says public sector innovators around the world are just trying to get to the best ideas that can really work and be in a position to pass that legislation or get that policy approved fast. So they've created a platform that says if somebody figured out how to pass green street lighting in Chile, that somebody who's trying to pass green street lighting in London can just pick up that idea and run with it and get access to the innovator who got it passed in the first place, find out how they did it, use technology to accelerate. And so I think about the green jobs machine, one element of it as let's use technology as a way to scale, not only to get bigger, but also through replication and to have more ownership at a local level. And if that's part of the intentionality of the process, that if one of the objectives is not just how big can this get, how fast can this get for the investors who can make the most money out of it, but rather success being how many people wound up with ownership, how many people wound up being part of that solution, how many good jobs, not just jobs, but good jobs got created, again, for men and women in communities. That our metrics need to change. And we know the kind of metrics, some of the kinds of metrics that need to change. And for some of it, we need to do more research. And I see the Green Jobs Machine project as a research engine as well, not only to really understand what resilience looks like, what is going to be the basis of adoption of these new solutions, but also to understand what are the right ways to scale and what are the things worth replicating and what are the right metrics to be using. And women are just all over that picture. So, and I could give you hundreds of entrepreneurs, women-led, women-founded, maybe where the woman was the scientist and innovator, but it's not, she's not the CEO of the company, in the solar space, in the water space, in the green building space, in the sustainable agriculture space, people who are doing vertical farming, both in California and Malawi, with built-in energy and water systems. I mean, the innovation opportunity here is just off the charts. And if we're not paying attention to where the women are, I mean, that's what can we do right now? We can be opening up our aperture and saying, what am I not seeing? Who am I not seeing? Who's not at the table? And then making sure they get access to the capital and the resources, the training, the access to markets, the access to resources that they need to be successful.
Absolutely love it. And did you have a question, or I was actually going to ask for a joiner, but you go first.
Yeah, so I just wanted to piggyback on something that Suzanne said, and then we probably should also hear from our folks who are streaming in. Welcome here at the Stimson Center, as well as the incredible cohort that we've got online. Suzanne, as always, you're just nailing it. And one of the things that we are hoping to do at the Green Jobs Machine is to become that place where you go when you need research, data, insights on resilience, so that we can do exactly what Suzanne talked about. Let's go and figure out what's working in Texas and then do that in Louisiana. Let's understand what's working where and how, but also what's not working so that we can tweak it or stop doing it and stop wasting money and focus on things that are working. And for that, you need data. You need to aggregate that data. You need to be able to run the analytics. And then more importantly, you need to be able to translate that data into something that is useful for someone who's not a data scientist. So that if I'm a policy maker or I'm a planner, At the local level, I can say, okay, all right, so this worked in Louisiana and Texas, but we're sitting now in Virginia Beach, by the way, which is where we're from, Norfolk Tidewater, born in the same hospital, by the way.
Exactly.
Yeah, figure that out. We got synergy in spades going here, right? And so now we're at Virginia Beach and we're trying to figure out how to really deploy that 200 million that we've just gotten from the feds to shore up the communities around the naval bases because the sea level is rising and, you know, we need to protect our shipbuilding activities. So what did we learn in Louisiana that can help us right here? And so in order to do that, you need data. Goes back to Bill's point. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a resilience index. We've trademarked it, so haha, don't try to take a shot. So we're building a resilience index. We're building resilience tech, right? You heard it here first, resilience tech. We are a resilience tech company. And so that if you imagine that kind of tower where, you know, you can say, okay, something's happening. We've got space technology that helps us figure out where this is all going. We need to deploy resources over here in Virginia Beach, and we're going to get some lessons that we learned in Louisiana. And we're going to knock it out the ballpark because now we know we've got some data to help us get it right. So we're going to take a lot of the guesswork, but as a result of that, you are de-risking the capital that needs to be deployed, both the human, the creative, the financial, physical, right? So I would just wanted to just say that the what of the green jobs machine couldn't exist before because the technology didn't exist before. So we had all these playbooks, but we couldn't do like this and scale it because it was so high touch. You know, you had to get a whole bunch of people and go into the community and start digging it. Well, we still need to have some high touch, still need to do that. But you can also industrially scale these activities now because we've got technology that enables us to do that. So our behavior tech is our secret sauce, and it helps people to quickly get a mindset change and to find the leanest path to getting it right. And that didn't exist before.
And to just amplify what you were saying, and I love how this jazz ensemble is coming together. We did not do any scripting here, so this is all live. But what you heard and what Sharon said, what you heard and what Suzanne said, and what you heard and what Bill said was thinking about metrics, thinking about ESG. And we know that a lot of companies in the past have claimed they cared about ESG, but when you really looked underneath the hood, what were they really measuring? Was it double or triple counted? Was it actually substance there? But like you said, the tech now exists as we instrument the world through Internet of Things, through what's happening with satellites. We're going from less than 7,000 satellites in orbit at the moment to in less than 8 years, more than 100,000 satellites in orbit. And so we can actually now start to hold people accountable for their ESG metrics and say, okay, you said you were investing to achieve the following ends. Did you really achieve that reduction in terms of either pollution generated or carbon footprint or things like that? And I think that goes back to the resilience index of the green jobs machine, which is be careful what you measure, but if you have the ability to influence what's measured, you can then have companies show something beyond just that straight, here's what we produce in terms of stakeholder or shareholder value. Yep. We can actually show how we actually did that social return that Bill was talking about. You can go to governments and say, look, we're going to need you to do a discount in the short term because no one's going to buy those Teslas to start with because they're too expensive, but over time we'll create a market. Mm-hmm. And so I think that idea that the green jobs machine is about what's going on in terms of how to do it and sharing those playbooks. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, and this is where, again, not to put Suzanne and Bill on the spot, but in their communities as well, to influence a way that we can have consistent metrics that matter. Absolutely. In the green job space, including employment, but things as well that go beyond that. That can be very influential.
Can I just add one thing about workforce development?
Sure, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, so I've done some work with public sector workforce development and private sector workforce development. I built and sold a company in the ed tech space many, many years ago. And one of the other pieces here is that if you have the data also about what kinds of jobs are needed and what kinds of skills are needed, then one of the critical factors that investors really care about is, are you going to be able to have the talent, access the talent who can really bring what they need to be able to bring to be effective, productive, motivated workforces. And so if you take all those individual data points about all the companies and all the solutions, and you start to say, wow, there's about 15 jobs that are consistent, then people can, from a public sector standpoint and a private sector standpoint, say, let's make sure the workforce development engine is also matching up with what these needs are from the entrepreneur perspective. And, it's what's really hard in especially public sector workforce development is by the time they figure it out, it's usually out of date. And so we got to move faster, and we got to be nimble, and we got to be able to say, if we're consciously thinking about what will make for a good, well-paid, upward mobility, job that people want to do, then we got to be listening also for where's the workforce side. And then from an investor perspective, that de-risks it. And that's where you also start to say, if people are paying attention to human capital, that's one of the ingredients to successful businesses.
I absolutely love that. And I'm going to put a colleague who has walked into the room on the spot. So Bevan, get ready, because you need to pull the microphone towards you, because it's going to be, so scoot it towards you. One, I absolutely love what you shared, because almost maybe now 12 years ago, I was in a nonpartisan status, and I was asked whether or not XML could solve employment. And at first I scratched my head and said, what do you really mean? And they said, if there was an XML standard, would that help people find jobs? Short version, no, because there are actually more jobs advertised online than actually exist in the United States. Turns out
The
companies.
geeks are laughing at this, by the way.
Yes. There are false flag job postings. Who knew that companies post job postings as a sign of company growth, and so they inflate their stock price with false flag jobs. But that said, I said you could actually put forward the type of education necessary to get a job, and then have a competition to see who could write an app or a website that says, I'm currently X, I want to retrain to be Y. What courses can I take online or community colleges to do that, and link that to where they go. So that leads me now to Bevan over here, because Bevan, I want you to share a little bit about what you're doing with Elevate U, not to put you on the spot, but I think that's going to be a critical part as we think about green jobs. So over to you, Bevan, if you could unmute your mic. I think there you go, you're live.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you again, and we're happy to be here. I brought some really cool friends that you guys might find very interesting.
Actually, I don't know, can we bring the camera to Bevan? If not, I'm going to invite you up to the stage.
So
All right, just come up here. Come on up.
Yeah, sorry.
Come on, Bevan. We're going to put you on the spot. Sorry, Bevan was not prepared for this, but run on up, run on up. We'll hand you here, Shoni. You give him this one. I'll give you my.
No, it's fine. I'm going to get out of the way.
No.
Hello.
All right, Bevan, over to you.
all right. So what we've done with the Elevate U is we've created a model, and we've partnered up with the city of Virginia Beach, and one of their representatives are here today. And what we've done is created different sectors of an ecosystem for hiring. And we wanted to connect community, the city, and the individuals and schools directly to the same network. So what we've done is we've built this portal to like a handshake, like is built for schools. We built the portal. We connect different colleges, high schools, and we sync them into the job market, and there's available jobs there. We've also partnered up with the Labor Department, so they provide the opportunities. So the kids can see what's available out there. They get to see what it takes to get there, what certificates, what training they need, what degrees they need to also get there. And we've also connected the city to its own portal. So DC would have a portal, New York would have a portal, Virginia would have a portal, Virginia Beach, the city, would have a portal. So their employers would connect directly to the portal. So you would know exactly what's available in the city, what jobs are there. The colleges can also connect to the opportunities there. So in Virginia, we have a massive brain drain within the city, not within the city, within the state, because we have some really top colleges there like University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and there's no opportunities there for the kids after they graduate. So we're trying to bring awareness, and now that we're going to be one of the largest, I would say, green jobs availability when it comes to the offshore wind. So Virginia Beach and coastal Virginia is building one of the largest offshore wind farms in the United States of America. And it's going to be in federal waters as well. So it's the only one in federal waters. So we're going to generate a lot of green energy. We're going to generate a lot of green jobs and opportunities around. So we need to bring the attention to it, and then also create a pathway for people to cross-train or switch opportunities or be able to, educate themselves directly into the sector. So we've partnered up with multiple individuals, schools, cities, and communities, and the businesses within the communities. And that's how you get real jobs and not fake opportunities laying out there to gather people's information. And the path to being hired is a lot faster because you're dealing with the companies there that need people right now. And the schools, we get to port in particular jobs, certain particular jobs to the schools that they're looking for. So we're not going to give them opportunities that their kids are not going to be able to get those opportunities, right? So we wanted to make sure that we bring them together properly, so.
Excellent. Well, thank you for really for sharing that, Bevan. Sorry to
Thank
put
you.
you on the spot, but you did wonderful. I'm going to circle now to Bill and then to Suzanne with some follow-up questions. But if anyone has questions either in the room or online, if you're online, if you could send it as a chat message. Do we have any questions at the moment? Queued up, not a moment, just ask online. I am going to go to Bill though, because building on what Bevan just shared about the importance of linking education to future jobs, I'm going to put Bill on the spot and say he was the one that called me down to the principal's office when I was 17 and offered me a job that involved classified government satellites at the time. And he's responsible for all the craziness.
You're in
that happened
trouble,
afterwards.
David. You were in trouble.
Oh, I know.
Good
Everyone
trouble.
was like, ooh. And yeah, the rest is history. But I share that, Bill, because one of the things that you're saying in your remarks is that we need to de-risk some of these research things that are coming out of the national labs and other institutions. And so, Bill, recognizing we've only got maybe about 11 minutes left, maybe if you could be fairly brief on what is the opportunity in terms of de-risking that early stage research to help with both green jobs, but also employment at the local level too.
Yeah, no, so thanks. And one of the best decisions I ever made was to get you down to the principal's office to hire you. So thank you. So I think that when I think about this, there's a huge number of opportunities, both, when you look at the amount of research that goes on, one of the things that we're really good at as a country, and globally, I think this is also true, is doing the fundamental basic science research and sort of the early applied. But the place where we have a huge amount of inefficiency is getting that out of the lab and into creating value for society. There's so many impediments to that. And there's a couple of words that Sharon used that I want to repeat. Talked about speed. We don't have time on this issue. We've got to act now. And scalability. This is a global problem. And yet the solutions are often at the local level. And so when you're in that kind of scenario, you really have to think about what are the pain points? What is preventing this from happening quickly and at scale? And when you look at those pain points, you can derive incentives to then make it easier. So, typically pain points would be things like money, right? The government can either provide funding, they can provide tax rebates, they can provide other kinds of incentives, or they can tax as a penalty, right? There's also, though, time. So as a driver, right, we all see that the government can incentivize us using either clean energy by having HOV lanes that are open only to e-vehicles, or encouraging us to use mass transportation. But think about it from a company perspective. If you've got, say, clean tech that is, say, low carbon concrete or some other new building material that you could use, can you imagine the adoption that would happen if communities made it easier to actually get that technology out the door by changing the permitting process, right? If you just said, okay, if you use clean tech in a building, we're going to accelerate that permit, that reduces the time, that reduces the cost, and quite frankly, that would be a zero cost to the government, and it would radically shift technologies that would be used in something like clean buildings. That's just an example. And then the other is just maintaining certainty. What we've seen is a lot of times governments have put their toe in the water with a certain policy at the local level or federal level, and they pulled back and changed it, and then they pulled back and changed it. You need long-term sustainability in the policies so that companies can make the right kinds of investments for the future. But I think that, understanding the incentive structure, understanding the pain points leads you to ways of really trying to accelerate how to get solutions into creating value.
Love it.
Love it. Over to you, Sharon.
Yeah, I gotta say something quickly about what Bill said, and then we're gonna go to that. But before I do that, I need to come back to Bevan. So I wanted to just mention CollabWorks. He talked about Elevate EU. Our entire team operates on CollabWorks, which is something that's come out of Bevan's stable of technologies. And I raise that because we are a collective. Part of what we do at GJM is to orchestrate this incredible network. That's part of our business model, is network orchestration. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel. To the extent that there are great people out there doing great stuff like Bevan, like others, we're just going to partner with those guys, right? And we're going to focus on the platform, which is aggregating the data, right? So to the extent we can roll into a community and there are great incubators that are working already, hello, get over here. You're part of this. And to the extent that we can have the puzzle pieces that are already working, we're totally just going to bring them into the collective, which is going to allow us to continue to focus on the resilience index and the resilience scoring. And that's something I didn't mention before. People like to compete. We want Virginia Beach competing with Hampton, competing with Newport News, competing with Suffolk to say who's the most resilient, right? And we want to score that, because people love to compete. So we want to gamify the process. We want to make it fun. We want to make, achieving those SDGs fun by just ranking folks and saying, hey, you get the award, right? My money's on Virginia Beach, by the way. I hope no people here from Hampton. So we're going to go with our Virginia Beach guys. And so I love what you're saying. What we want to do at the local level is understand what the scaling infrastructure is already. Like, what are the institutions that are available to be part of this? How are those institutions working? How are people communicating around this? Is there a resilience strategy in place? How can we make that better? It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about shoring up what's working.
Intentional in Bevan's example of making sure that men and women have equal opportunity to jobs that are typically gendered, for example. So jobs typically gendered male, why aren't women able to be in some of those jobs? Because they've lacked access to the inspiration, to the education, to the opportunities, right? So not to make the old assumptions, but to say, if we're coming up, it's 2022, and we only got a couple of years here, we need everybody. We need all the right people in the right jobs in the right places, right? So that's one. But then also just to be thinking about the metrics and the intentionality as we put in incentives. So what is the role that public and private capital can say to say, guess what? We're going to invest here. The people we're investing in should look like the population of that place. So we should be just kind of fundamental thinking, right? And so if we're not doing that, then that should be part of what we're celebrating with the people as we go and we do this competition, Sharon. We got to build into the competition that part of the metrics that get you points is when you look like the population of that place. And when the ownership is not only accruing to the big investors, on Wall Street and wherever they may be, but where ownership at a local level, and that also means voice and decision-making and agency and all the rest of it, is part of what we celebrate as a core metric, and that we demonstrate that then ties to the financial metrics, so that it's not a separate thing, but that it's built in.
That's why you're here, Suzanne.
All right, I'm going to do a quick moderator's
You're gonna help
privilege.
us.
We are going to go a little bit long to address maybe 2 questions. I apologize
Just
for
one.
those online, but this is just the start of the day. I want to give an early thanks in advance to both Suzanne and Bill. You have been amazing. We may have some follow-up with you based on these questions, but the first question is.
So we have the first question in the chat from Eric Rasmussen asking if you can speak for a moment to international collaboration, government, private, NGO, and academic.
All right, so the question was from Eric Rasmussen to speak a little bit about international collaboration, including other non-traditional partners. I'm going to go to you, Sharon. You have 60 seconds on the clock.
Eric, we are all about it. Every person who is either in this room, and we've got, our growing cadre of people here in the room, if you're on this platform or you're in this room, you've been hand selected. This is a soft launch. We went out and we hunted you. We were like looking for you.
The pursuit team. from
Yeah, the
Sloan.
pursuit team was on you. And we want you in here because we value not just your networks. And yes, this is a soft launch and we are going to need to raise capital, but we need intellectual capital too. We need your insights. And so you're here because we are just beginning. We've been working on this for a year and a half, kind of, in stealth mode, making sure we got this right and that, no one was doing this because we didn't need to reinvent the wheel. And no one is. So that's why we've got to do it. So we are absolutely intentional. We're going to come back to Suzanne's point. And so Suzanne, that's one of the reasons why you're here. You need to hold us accountable. And we're going to be partnering with Gender Smart and whoever we need to partner with to get those metrics right. Eric, we've got 2 strategic pilots that we're going to talk about that's up next. That's going to be here in the United States. Why are we starting in the United States when we know that we need to do this globally, as Dr. Bill has talked about? Well, because we know this market and we're here and we need to hold as many variables in the equation constant while we get the other stuff right, the stuff that's never been done before, okay? And so, but right away, then we're going to go to South Africa because it's kind of like developing country light, no slight to South Africa, right? It's both an incredibly developed country and a developing country in one. And so we know that market, we've invested there, we've done great things there. And so we're gonna be able to hold some variables constant while adding another layer of complexity. And so the idea is that we continue to add layers of complexity by going deeper into the developing world where a lot of this really has to happen. So our big growth at GJM is probably not gonna be in the United States. It's really gonna be in Asia. Emerging Asia, India, Africa, and other places. So this is very much a global play. And we need you, Eric. We invited you here because we need you to ask those questions. We need to be talking to you. We need you to sign up. We need to send you information. And we need to start talking to you now about how we're going to bring this to your town.
And I'm going to give a little bit of subtext and maybe put Eric on the spot. So Eric is also an alumni of Singularity University. So you share that as well. And Eric, if we can bring you back later on, I would love you to share a little bit about what you're doing with the Marshall Islands, because there might be some strong relevance here. All right, one more question. That's it. Well, we're going to conclude now because we are at the mark of our time for the first session. We will be back in 30 minutes. So if you can join us at the top of the hour, whatever time zone you're in. In the interim, we will now cut to, do we want to play a video or do we want to just have a background?
Yeah, we're going to
Cut to a video so you can see what our messaging is. And with that, we launch. More to come. See you at the top of the hour for the next sentence.
Don't leave, just stretch. Look at your toes.
Stretch, do
Call
some
someone
jumping
and say, get on
jacks,
this
get some
platform.
oxygen.
Stuff is happening. All right,
Exactly.
cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.